everybody. Really wonderful conversation. See, Autumn, thank you again so much. Yes. And she's here, and this is a small enough group, so, approach her. Ask her a question, right? Absolutely. For all your pronunciation needs. Great. So our next guest, I'm so proud to have join me on stage, Guadalupe Guerrero. Guadalupe joined Portland Public Schools as the superintendent almost 2 years ago now, right? It was October 2017.
October 1st will make it 2 full years.
Excellent. Good. Thank you for sticking around for so long. But this was after serving really successful administrative education leadership roles in both Boston and San Francisco. But then it's also important to note that you started your career as a teacher, right?
Actually, I started as a parent coordinator in an after-school program for youth in the inner city, and then I went on to become a classroom aide. And so it's just been a constant demotion all these 25 years.
Really, the real power is with the parent, right?
Absolutely.
And then, of course, since arriving at Portland Public Schools, you've had your hands full. And let me list some of the things. And I know I've missed stuff, but so you've opened 2 comprehensive middle schools in North and Northeast Portland. You've redesigned your district's your central office management, your leadership structure. You've inked a contract with the teachers union. I think right now it's really obvious with the new school year, you've executed on construction bonds that are absolutely transforming the district buildings brick by brick. And we'll have plenty of time to talk about those things you've done. One of the things that I want to do is, since we had C. Autumn up here, I wanted to ask you about Native students in Portland Public Schools. What you know about Native students, what is happening right now currently in Portland Public Schools to serve them. We know that 17-18 school year graduation rate, 4-year graduation rate was at just over 50%, 54%.
That's right.
And what is it that we need to do next to serve our Native students?
Well, first of all, thank you, Matt, for noticing we haven't been slacking off the last 20-some months. There definitely have been no shortage of challenges to take on, which I feel is a privilege for us to get up every day to do that work on behalf of our students, especially our students who haven't necessarily experienced success or excellence on our watch. And Portland Public, just like San Francisco and Boston, as an urban school district, serves a diversity of students. And so while the Native student population is just a little more than 1% of the nearly 50,000 students, and I think it's also important to mention that the adults who work in the school system are even less than 1%, so not quite a representational demographic. How are we culturally responsive to our Native students and families is I think something we have a lot of dialogue and work to do, and I think it has something to do with why there's a widening gap between their outcomes and some of their peers. So while 3/4 of our students greater than the state average, and it should be 100, are walking across the stage, why is it just more than half of Native students are? And why do we see varying gaps at the 9th grade, at the 6th grade, at the 3rd grade? And frankly, when they walk in our doors in kindergarten, we know the readiness, those opportunity gaps are already presenting themselves. And so how can we work with the broader Native community to be more culturally responsive in the supports, the interventions? And that's not work we can do by ourselves as educators. So how do we work with those organizations and community leaders to be more mindful about the unique needs of our Native students and other populations?
Yeah. That's funny you should mention that, because let me again go to the City Club report from 1975. Another wonderful recommendation that they made. The initiative for the most effective programs addressing the needs of Indian people in Portland has issued from the Indian community itself. There is not certainly universal consensus among Indians living in Portland about the remedies for the problems they face. There is agreement among Indians, however, that the problems are best met by programs designed and run by Indians, which I think is a really strong example of and recommendation of self-determination within the Native community.
Something I'm clear about as an educational leader, the vision we have for student success has to be a collective movement. We heard earlier, we have to do our part, and if we're going to have a collective impact, we have to leverage folks, new to the area. I'm always learning a little bit of the history, and it sounds like it took a few decades for SB 13 to come to fruition. The challenge for us as a school system is how do we much more quickly implement the practices and the policies that are suggested there. So I am looking forward to us moving aggressively in making sure that the curriculum and the instructional pedagogy and the professional learning that our educators, our leaders need to embark on, that as the largest school district in Oregon, that we model and demonstrate what that can look like.
Excellent. Thank you for entertaining that question. So what did you do this summer? What were the highlights? What are you looking forward to in the next year?
Well, once again, we weren't slackers. This was, I think, in recent history, one of the most productive summers in Portland Public. And so the team worked diligently this whole summer. A number of things were happening. You may have heard that we had a grand reopening of Grant High School. So, try moving an entire high school back to a facility, for example. We had all kinds of ambitious health, safety, security, and construction projects happening at dozens of other locations because there's also a lot of other buildings that need repair and addressing deferred maintenance issues. But we also engage in a pretty thorough professional development catalog opportunities for our educators and for some of our employee groups who haven't had a chance for some up-to-date training. So our team was rather busy making sure to make those opportunities available. And of course, we're really proud of producing our new vision, which came as a result of a 10-month community process. And so we're busy thinking about now, how do we operationalize that?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. So I had an opportunity to participate in this guiding coalition that contributed to it, and I thought it was a really fantastic opportunity to kind of piggyback on something that Siadam mentioned. It wasn't just about the current issues, the issues of next year, or even the issues that we might face 10 years from now, but really decades, generations from now. What are we expecting? And then for me, it was really disarming. It was taking me out of the space. So I'm interested in why was that process important to you? And tell us a little bit about what came out of it.
Yeah, we're very proud of this effort as a new leadership team in the school system. Something that was very clear to us from the very beginning is what are we working hard towards? We need to take our cues from the community. Meaning students, families, educators, all of the stakeholders. And what's resulted from that process, a very wide cross-section of folks, is what we call Portland Public Schools Reimagined. I know we made some of those materials available here this evening because the results and the outcomes we're getting, we heard it earlier, the school system's designed to produce those outcomes. And so if we're going to change those outcomes, we have to rethink the way we play school. And the first thing we knew that we needed to do was to define what are the skills and dispositions that our graduates, when they walk across the school, that they possess. And we wanted to be very forward-thinking about that. These are not traits that school systems usually describe in a graduating 12th grader. And so you see a graduate portrait that talks about how do we produce students who are reflective and empathetic, empowered? How are they have a strong sense of self-agency? How are they global stewards? The byline on our title of our vision is preparing our students to lead change and improve the world. That's not your typical mission statement, What we're saying is we want to send off kids who can tackle real-world problems, and our job is to give them transferable skills like critical thinking and to exercise that to try to solve all the dilemmas we've helped to create along the way for them. So we're excited about the graduate portrait that's described in here. It's only possible because the community came together for 10 months in dozens of opportunities. And we didn't stop with the graduate portrait. We can't produce this kind of a student unless we talk about the educator essentials to cultivate those skills. And then we also called out what are the system shifts, because as a system we have to engage in a transformation. And so the aggressive agenda that we're embarking on is not just the physical transformation of PPS, but it's also the academic and the social emotional and youth leadership agenda that we also want to engage in.
That's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So the board oftentimes plays this governance role. They hold you accountable. They also create a vision for the district, really. I mean, they're the ones that put their stamp and they put their, as representatives of the community, they put their stamp on that. But what does, you have that tough work of wrangling how many thousand staff do you have?
We're the 6th largest employer in the Portland metro area with 9,600 employees.
So 9,600 employees. I know 6,000 or so of those are teachers in the classrooms. A lot of educators, a lot of support staff, a lot of administrators. So you have the task of working with all of them to really actualize this. So what is it that, as a parent, a PPS parent, what is it that I can expect to see in my child's school as this begins to roll out across our district? What would my first indication of that vision be?
Well, it's a very audacious and aspirational vision that we have for our graduates, and it's not going to happen overnight. But we know that we're going to have to sequence the work in deliberate ways so that it actually comes to fruition. And so now that we've produced the document with the community's involvement, we're entering this education phase so that our students understand it, our educators understand it, our principals are prepared to lead it, which, by the way, we're having an all-day leadership development and training specifically on this topic about how do you lead this conversation in your school community, and how do we begin to show our parents why the experience for our students might start to look a little bit different than maybe they're traditionally used to.
So Portlanders, as you might have learned, we're really excel at criticizing things.
I hadn't noticed.
Very good.
I'm unaccustomed. What are you talking about?
What we're not always good at, we're being honest here, let's be truthful. We're not always good at channeling that energy into more constructive things. So my question is, how can we, when we're our better selves, how can we channel our energy into more constructive efforts that can support the school district or other school districts, not just PPS, but other school districts, and really trying to execute upon what their vision is?
I think one of the features that attracted me to this leadership role in the first place is because I could see from afar, having been observing it for a little while, along with many of my peers around the country, is clearly there was a very engaged community in the Portland Public Schools. And so I see that as an asset. How do we channel it in some strategic ways? And in the absence of an agenda or a vision, it can kind of go all over the place. So, the vision helps hopefully to channel that. But one of the reasons that our public schools have done as well as they have, and there are an incredible amount of positive things that we don't often spotlight, is because our parents are awesome. They're volunteering, they're in PTAs, they're advocates. You see the community rallying around its neighborhood schools. You see that in small ways and big ways. At the end of every summer, we have Community Care Day. You have hundreds of people out there just sprucing up the learning environment. You see philanthropy taking a strong interest in the more innovative work that we're doing. You see our stakeholders being advocates and champions, along with our legislators from the area, for really important work, which I think you saw in the Student Success Act, which represents a really important investment which hasn't happened for generations in the work of public schools. So we're looking forward to continuing to engage our community and, more importantly, empower those members of the community who maybe have been disenfranchised over time. And so what does it look like to meaningfully gather their input and feedback as we go about this work?
Yeah. And I think, what does that look like? Because we don't often spend time in that space. So I want to ask you, maybe it might be our last question, but I want to ask you around, education. This is not just the local, sort of the local narrative, but really a national narrative. There's a lot of either or. It really, it's either negative or, it's wonderful or it's not. I think we have an opportunity to do something different in Portland, but I'm really curious, where do you think Portland can stand out in its uniqueness and its innovation, can really be a leader in education for the entire country?
Yeah, I remain optimistic that Portland can transform itself to be the premier school system in America. I think it can simultaneously strive for excellence for all its students while maintaining an assertive racial equity agenda. We have to differentiate for the needs of our school communities, for the needs of our students, for the needs of our educators, and we have to engage them in that conversation. And there's a few ways that we can do that, just as a demonstration of that collective will to embark on work that maybe is not typical of public schools. So I'll give you an example, since you're asking. We have an emerging youth leadership movement to really educate the broader public about the urgency of climate justice. And so when I just talked about the sense of agency we want our students to have, well, they're already demonstrating that. And so how do we support our students who are leading a movement in some ways much better than the adults are, and create a teachable moment? So these are topics we want to certainly discuss in our classrooms. It's a topic that's super important and relevant, and talk about a real world problem that our youth understand to be a critical one to take on. What would it look like for Portland public students to really show other districts around the country what it can look like when you take on real world issues like this? So I just, as you brought up student voice, I was just reminded by, I think your first time on a city club stage where you laid out your, really your vision, here's what we're going to do, and now you're executing on that. And then one student after another got up and asked you really direct questions. Mm-hmm. And I bring that up because I think there really is an opportunity in partnership too, whether it's civic scholars through City Club or it's through nonprofit organizations and other mentorship programs. I really appreciate the interest and the focus on student voice. Well, we're trying to make sure we're always highlighting student voice. And so anytime our adults are together, we always feature students. So there's always a spoken word, a performance. We try to include them in the conversation. The way we've restructured our own administration and the central office includes new positions that are focused on community engagement or youth leadership development. It's another lens to think through. Not only are we placing students at the center, but is this decision, is this investment that we're making forwarding our racial equity agenda? And so we have to retool and recondition ourselves to make those very intrinsic lenses by which we view the work. But I think you can count on continuing to see students highlighted in everything we do moving forward. Wonderful. Thank you, Guadalupe. Please give Guadalupe a round of applause. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Julie. She's going to wrap us up. All right.
We're grateful to everyone who made this evening discussion possible. Thank you to the speakers, C. Autumn Edmo and Guadalupe Guerrero, as well as our moderator, Matt Morton. And thank you to all who joined us. We invite you to stay and continue the conversation.